You see, TV is power. The power to love, to pacify. And then when all eyes are glazed and all minds are jelly, power to hold the world in your fist.
Are you ready, Amelia?
Yes, I am.
All right, roll sound.
Welcome to Different Views, One Voice. Each week, our host, Amelia Ismore, will have conversations with her guests, telling us their views on music, spirituality, politics, lifestyles, fashion, hip-hop and culture, each having different views, one voice.
Today, in almost every finance report, it is becoming more and more clear that the middle-class society, who is the backbone of American economics, is in jeopardy of not existing. What has created the divide? How is America going to stop the death of middle class and the newfound separation of America from those that have and those that have not? It's well known that real estate, industry, and middle-class spending has always been the vehicles that sustained American economy. Yet today, millions of American homeowners have debt exceeding their assets. Added to this reality is their inability to obtain the capital needed for them to improve their economic standing and position, many of which have no solution to their plight. And the reality of these homeowners' plight is that it directly impacts the mortgage holders. The banks which hold the mortgages have often found themselves possessing mortgages for numerous distressed properties. These properties create and represent a negative performing asset on the books and balance sheets of the banks. The banks seek to rid themselves of these properties, yet the usual means of doing so are time-consuming, cumbersome, and involve an expenditure of capital which results in an overall greater loss of their investment, leaving both parties, banks and homeowners, seeking relief. Our guest today, Dr. Robert Yasim Wright, will reveal how he has the antidote for the deadly disease of the negative equity epidemic. Welcome, Dr. Robert Yasim Wright.
Thank you, thank you.
How you doing today?
I'm pretty good.
So now, before we go into your whole quantum approach to credit risk, can you give us just a little bit about your finance background and how you became an expert at this subject?
Okay. Well, I'm not really an expert. I don't like to consider myself to be an expert, but thanks. But what it is I have a substantial amount of experience in entertainment finance, acquisitions, and my own self-research for years. I started out in the entertainment business, actually, as a young man, producing records. I got ripped off so bad, I just sat there with the CEO of the record company and just kept my mouth shut and learned everything I could about the money. And then from there I went into film school and learned about directing, but they didn't teach you about money. A lot of my friends worked at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. I had a couple of great personal friends of mine at the Fed Reserve who worked there, and they were licensed traders. Right. So I got an in-depth study, in-depth, like how it really works. Not the presentation that is made to the public, but how it really works. What's the reality?
Well, with your insight, in your own opinion, where do you feel, or how do you feel America got to this crisis that we're in, or this debt crisis?
The Titanic.
Yes, pretty much.
You know what I mean? Basically, it's a combination of things. There's many different pieces to that puzzle. It's hard to just pinpoint one definition and say, okay, this is how that happened, this is how that happened, because it's multiple happenings that made it into a decline.
Well, they talk about the subline mortgage rate that hurt.
The subprime, yeah.
Yes, that hurt it. They also talked about the securities as far as being overseas and foreigners having
debt.
That. And yes, exactly. Could you elaborate? Are those some of the contributing factors?
Yeah, those are some of the contributing factors. You had a lot of, how can I say, you had a lot of mismanagement. But see, this system is functioning under securitization. It's not functioning under the gold standard. It's all about collateral. The internal mechanics of the financial system in its entirety is collateral. And the securities functions as collateral.
You know, your proposal breaks down the quantum approach to credit risk in 3 approaches. 1, risk redirection.
Yes.
Also debt collateralization. And then finally, asset resurrection.
Yes.
So can you explain each of these and how they modernize our approach to credit risk?
Well, what I did was I came up with a program where we can satisfy mortgage obligations. Well, the first is satisfying the principal and interest for the homeowners, and the result of that is removing the risk from the books of the bank. It removes the liability, because anytime you have credit risk, that is somebody lending someone money, and in that transaction there's a risk that they might not get their money back. So the science of collateral is actually in the infrastructure of the financial system in its entirety. So I was able to address the issue for people who are behind in their mortgages. It's like when you have somebody that's $400,000 they owe the bank, and we turn around and satisfy that obligation up front, and in the exchange for the use of the equity for 5 years, we remove the risk from the books of the bank, and then it turns into equity.
Now you have a T3 initiative program that pretty much kind of works in conjunction, or is the antidote for this risk redirection.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit about that T3 and how, you know, what are the qualifications of the people that is in each one of these tiers?
Okay. The T3 program is people who have no equity. That's a reverse situation. You have people who have a little bit of equity, but they can't get any money. You have some people with substantial equity, but bad credit. They can't get any money.
Yeah, FICO.
Yes, so they can't get any money. So the problem is that they don't have access to capital. This program allows the homeowner to be free and clear of their existing mortgage obligations. So we utilize the system of debt satisfaction by taking what we have for the homeowner's needs specifically. We're targeting the homeowner's needs with giving them the financial product that will allow them to be free and clear of their debt, to make it simple.
So, you know, just keeping it in the simplicity form, basically you're saying that RYW Financial Solutions, Inc. is actually incurring that responsibility of that income.
Yes. What we're doing is we're taking on the responsibility and satisfying it for the homeowners. You got 9.7 million homeowners that are in debt, underwater. You're talking underwater. The average debt to equity ratio is 90 to 150,000. When you multiply the debt to equity, there's a 60% difference. So what happens here is by taking the people who are underwater and satisfying the debt for them, it sort of puts a stabilization bar. So it levels out the situation.
So now what is the criteria for individuals that are in this status? Because there's quite a few to get into this program. Is there a fee or like FICO? Well, you said no
it's
FICO.
Not, right, it's not FICO driven. The program is not FICO driven. The program is for people with minimum requirements, because the old way of doing things, it needed a
upgrade.
It needed something different. You can't wear the same socks and the same shoes for 50 years straight. I mean, you have to change something.
Exactly.
So I just basically came up with this quantum approach because using the integration of risk redirection by paying off mortgages gives us the economy a boost, and the common person can regain his credit. He can fix himself up, because if your car is stuck on the side of the road, you're not going to be able to get nowhere and nobody stops and picks you up.
Right.
Or you have a long, long walk.
Right, or
See what I
long
mean?
wait
Right.
like so many
So what
homeowners
happens
are
is-
dealing with
Yes,
right
so
now.
a lot of people are in real big trouble. I mean, the psychological effects when you even do the research of people's depression, the amount of people that are becoming depressed behind their inability to move forward in America. They can't do it.
So you have this risk redirection,
Yeah.
where you're now taking the homeowner and assessing their equity or lack of, but then infiltrating the value of the property, so that evaluating the property, the value of the property, so that you can then help supply the monies that they need to save their properties.
Yes.
And then you also have debt collateralization,
Yeah.
which is the second
Yes.
fragment.
Yeah.
Can you explain about that?
Well, debt collateralization, where we identified two particular securities, U.S. Treasuries, which is the strongest because it's backed up by tax dollars. We were able to identify that and utilize that coming into a specific transaction account. And that particular transaction account will then be able to monetize that collateral by getting a loan to value, let's say 90% LTV against that face value or par value of that instrument, of that security. So that's how you use that. You use two particular securities coming in simultaneously. So if you got one asset coming into the account, then you have another bank that's willing to participate to lend you the capital that you need. This can be a prototype for financing American businesses by investing in U.S. Treasuries with the liquidity of the banks.
That's ingenious.
See, and the thing is, the most important thing is to understand about that is it's an internal redevelopment. It's a prototype. To engage an entire landscape, because most of the businesses in America are being shipped out. The labor, the computers, everything is gone.
And that's creating another problem too,
That's
because
a
our money
huge
is
problem.
leaving our country.
It's a huge
And we're
problem.
not recycling, which is the tender. And you know, Congressman, I can't think of his name, Ron Paul, I think he said when Americans lose the confidence in the dollar,
Yeah.
that's when the economy is going to be,
Well, yeah.
destroyed.
See, the
because
thing
it's
is,
really just legal tender. It's
Right.
a piece of paper that says,
It's a piece of paper,
promise to pay you.
But that piece of paper
has
is
no
the
value.
but see, the piece of paper is the system. Banks have an internal multiplying system. They can lend out 10 times more than what's on deposit. That's the system that we have. The gold system was the gold system. This is the finance system that deals with those particular guarantees. Those structures are in place strategically by the use of the sale of the securities.
Now, the use of the sales of security, I know that you also had said that RYW also has a SPV, a special.
Yes. In moving bank risk, we created a special purpose vehicle that will utilize the concept of collateralization of debt for financing, so we can substantially remove the debt off the books of the bank and giving them a better performance by removing those liabilities, paying the common person's principal and interest from that nucleus. It starts from here and then it expands outward.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, how do those two
This
fragments
is a new
are those?
approach.
Right, exactly.
Very new approach.
Very new, and it's
Nobody's
completely
stepping up.
outside of the box.
Nobody's stepping up and saying, I'm going to pay that for you. Nobody's doing that. There is an imbalance. I'm going to go back to the original question real quick. The original question about what causes the problem. The problem is there is an imbalance between government regulation and private banking. That is a serious issue, because a lot of people, the human experience, you were never taught money from the womb.
Yeah.
Some people were, but a lot of people were not.
Which is
But
one of the major problems of American society right now.
That's a huge problem.
Focus on money, focus on money.
That's a huge problem right now, because what happens is you can't get a penny. I had a client who needed money. African American family in Brooklyn. They had a healthcare business, a spa, but they couldn't expand their business because they didn't have access to capital. The mother's credit score was in the toilet. the daughter's credit score was not good. They couldn't get any money, but they had all of this equity in their property, but they still could not borrow any money against that value.
Because they were deemed a credit risk.
Yes, deemed a credit risk, but those regulations, see, the bank makes money on their lending profits. When the economy expands, when the level of lending is available, when you remove credit from the system collapses. It freezes, and that's what creates the depression.
Now, one of the most amazing things in reading about your quantum approach was that you almost stipulated that none of the homeowners lose their property while they're going through this, the ownership of their property while they're going through this financing.
Right.
And the term is like 7 years.
Yes.
Which I found
5 to 7 years, yes.
Why that time, and how can they not lose their property? I explain that because most banks, they say, listen, we'll own it until you pay it back.
The conventional way is this. I'm going to lend you money over a 20-year, 10-year, 30-year period. It's a long time.
Yes.
Isn't that a long time to be
half your
in
life.
debt?
Right.
You go to work, you come home, you're
And
paying
you're still in
bills,
debt.
you're paying mortgage, Con Edison, natural gas, you're paying everybody, and you got nothing. You're stuck in the vice grip. That's the problem. So you figure like this. Nobody wants to stay in that situation. So the reason why I said 5 years is because if I pay off the debt for that client, in return, the use of the equity is allocated into a trust, a REMIC, which is insured, that our asset management team or teams can generate a certain return off it. So what happens is they have a chance without losing their title or deed. The only thing they're responsible for is the taxes and the insurance.
Which is remarkable because you're responsible for
That's
that regardless.
why this quantum approach is a leap, is a boom, like, Spock, Star Trek, bang. You understand? So it's like a leap into a futuristic concept.
Here's the thing. What do you say to the naysayers of playing devil advocate for a moment that say, well, this is set system, it's been proven, tried and true, and this quantum approach is just too outside of the box thinking, and why should we indoctrinate it? Why should they indoctrinate it?
Well, the reason why is because it's an upside for the banks and it's an upside for the average Joe.
A win-win.
It's a win-win for everybody and even the government, because with the debt collateralization technique, we are purchasing U.S. treasuries. They're selling the U.S. treasuries to the Chinese are buying them up. Everybody is buying up these securities that's callable, mind you.
Right.
If they dump those bonds into the marketplace, it could collapse the entire system. That's where the paranoia comes from.
Exactly.
But politicians are not financial people. They're politicians. Some of them were financial people, but then again, that's where the imbalance comes in.
Now, I'm so glad that you made that point because it kind of segues us right wonderfully into the asset resurrection.
Yes.
Because that kind of involves the government itself.
Well, see, what happens is, take the first step, debt collateralization. That's how we deal with the issue of the capital raise. The capital raise comes in through that particular strategy of simultaneously leveraging that particular security coming into the transaction account. That's step number one. So now you weave that fabric into the next one, which is risk redirection, the implementation of satisfying mortgage obligations. So now that's step two, that actually deals with removing the liability.
And bringing the confidence back.
Now, the third and the last one is resurrecting that asset, because we took something that was dead and frozen. The person who owes the bank $400,000 when their market value is only $300,000. By paying that, it automatically turned it from something that was negative into something performing. So now we are issuing securities to pension funds, banks, institutional clientele that provides more stabilization. Your 401k.
You know, I'm glad that you're even mentioning that, because that was my next question as far as who are the middle Americans that you feel would be the most viable candidates for this program? Unions?
Well, you mean in terms of the securities? Well, I'm going to interface with the AFL-CIO, the unions, because that's where the average person in America is, the working class. We're dealing with the working class who's in trouble. You know, you're talking about poverty line, then above the poverty line, and you got people who are making, let's say, $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, but they're broke. They have nowhere to go. Nowhere to go.
Exactly.
So now what we came up with was the way to issue a security for them for participating in the program. So that person can pay $4,000 and we will issue them a bond that will yield at maturity of 5 years or 7 years, depending upon their situation. So we have 3 different classes. So the people that will benefit is the people in the middle market. People in the middle market. Yes, the people that's being squeezed. And it's like I said, it's an upside for the person, the average person, and it's an upside for the bank, because the banks can now lend more money. These people got 5 years. You could clean your credit up, fix your situation in 6 to 12 months. Then you're back to meeting the government standards or the regulatory standards.
Which in turn allows us, because you had said that debt is actually money making.
Yes, see, a lot of people get intimidated by debt, but the reality is the whole financial environment is based on debt. If I borrow, and what they call a promissory, the guarantee, if I borrow $100, you know, I'm gonna pay you back. Right? I'm gonna pay you back $105 interest. That interest was just created. We just created money by dealing with the loan transaction. Exactly. With that kind of transaction.
Which is the backbone of America.
But it's the backbone of the capital idea. This is how it works. All the way back in the 1700s in Europe.
So in actuality, you're not diminishing the necessity of credit or even the application of debt. What you're doing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're doing is just creating a better flow, a better system that makes it more efficient.
Yes, it makes it more stabilized. It puts a stabilization bar on a fast car, like a cop car. When you look at a cop car, they do, what, 150, 60, and it doesn't rock and shift. The rocks and shifts in the economy happens what they call a V curve. There's so many different fancy terminologies, but because there's no stabilization.
Right.
American values, the core of American values is housing. When you own something, you want to take care of it.
Exactly.
You gonna rake them leaves, you gonna mow that grass, ain't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
See,
it's mine.
Right. And see, the thing is, because you take pride in ownership, the key is promoting ownership, and this gives the financial capability to perpetuate ownership. The distress environment is distress because no one can meet the obligations. A lot of people can't meet the obligations because they're in the squeeze.
Depression comes into play, and then all of a sudden the lack of concern, the lack of confidence, it's like a domino effect.
When you don't have access to capital, that creates the problem. People need to have access to money.
Now here, I love playing devil's advocate, so bear with me for a minute. This sounds so fundamental. It's just literally, I'm not a finance person, but I get it. So here's my question. Why have they not discovered this
You know why? Because sometimes something so small can be something so big. The micro prosopropria is the reflection of the macro prosopropria. We're talking about even in the quantum physics, the nucleus. It's in the middle, it's so small, but everything is inside of that one cell. You see what I mean?
Exactly.
So when change comes, divine change comes, It could come from the simple man, like if you want to get into a religious thing, like Christ, a simple person, or Buddha who had money and then gave his money away.
Exactly.
And then he went to go teach. See, change comes because of that purity and intention of righteousness.
Amen
So
to that.
if I sit in my room and sacrifice years to do the research because I say, wait a minute, this is hurting myself, I'm in a bad situation, my aunt, this person, everybody I know is in a bad situation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wright, for actually coming up with this formula. Last question, because we are running out of time.
I'm just starting to warm up now. In the beginning, I'm nervous, I'm shaking.
Well, where can everyone go to find out more information about RYW Financial Solutions and this T3 initiative program, as well as the quantum approach to credit risk?
Okay, well, I will be creating the web page specifically for it. www.thequantumapproachtocredit-risk, and I will actually be giving some presentations in DC at the Brookings Institute in Manhattan, at the Harvard Club, and at Columbia soon.
Well,
So
to make
it'll
life
be
very easy, all you
accessible.
have to do is keep it here, because your host at the most will definitely give it all to you. Thank you so much for watching Different Views, One Voice. And thank you so much, Dr. Robert Yasim, for coming out and
Well, thanks for
explaining
having
the
me.
quantum approach to credit risk. Continued success to you.
All right.
Till next time, remember, speak your voice.